here at the Michigan Council. Okay.
Okay, recording. Thank you.
All right, we'll start again. I'm Kristen Staley. I'm the Deputy Director here at the Michigan Council on Crime and Delinquency.
My name is Jason Smith, and I'm the Youth Justice Policy Associate here at MCCD.
Right, and so we're gonna, if this is okay, I'm gonna switch the screen so you just see our presentation, and then we'll kind of switch back out if that works for you guys.
That works.
So, and how we'll do this, there's some kind of natural breaks where we'll stop to see if there's any questions, and then we don't expect this the presentation to take the full 90 minutes, so we'll definitely have a lot of time to answer the questions as well, just so we can know. And so we wanted to talk a little bit, about who we are as an agency and what we do here at MCCD. So we're a nonprofit organization, and our main mission and our focus is on dedicating and improving those policies that affect youth and adult justice and crime issues. And so we work really across the state on an aggregate level, but we also work and provide technical assistance to local communities, to court systems, to those, whether it's DHS or MDOC, kind of local providers. But we do this through a lens that we have a vision of that everyone, regardless if you have a record or if you've somehow been justice involved, demands equal access and within our state justice systems. And that we believe very fully that if we're gonna truly get to a crime community safety, that the community and the citizens must be involved and be a partner to any of the work that we provide. And as I mentioned, our methods, we really focus on research, technical assistance, education, and advocacy, which is why, one of the presentations that we're giving here today. And so what Jason and I came up with in terms of when we were asked to provide a kind of a 101 or a primer on advocacy work that we do, we thought it would really be great to mirror an active campaign that we have right now, what we entitled Raise the Age Michigan, or Raise the Age MI. And it really focuses this type of chart where we had a goal that we started with, and we use these components such as fact-finding, conducting primary research, using tools of communication and media strategies, doing quite a bit in ongoing coalition and outreach campaigns, which led us to lobbying and pushing forward policy that we thought would really further our advocacy goal. And we, at the same time, are always working towards with direct action to make sure that those lobbying goals or this policy educations are kind of coming through. And so this will kind of model this little chart throughout our presentation today. And so because MCCD focuses on both youth and adult crime and justice issues, we came into our this initiative, which we entitled Youth Behind Bars and Raising the Age, with a little bit of knowledge of background. We knew that there was a lot of pervasive and emerging research that was coming out in the past couple of years that are very clearly showing what we kind of knew anecdotally, that young people are more inclined to take risks, more inclined to be influenced by peer pressure, to be amenable in a positive way through certain rehabilitative or behavior modification programs, that simply young people are just different than adults. And we saw in a national landscape, in terms of whether it was Supreme Court or federal law changes, that this line was being drawn across the board, across the nation, that there really was no excuse, as you see in this image, for trying and treating young people in the same manner that we treat older people, especially when it comes to if we're trying to rehabilitate or provide justice in some way. So we had a very clear advocacy goal of we need to stop treating our young people as adults in the state of Michigan. But we needed to understand what was it that we were really, we needed to really arm ourselves before we started this, towards the goal of changing these practices with facts and research and data, because as it says here, we really need to know, kind of back and front and sleep and breathe what we were talking about. We needed to have a lot of data and information to truly arm ourselves. And so we began the research process. This was now, we started working on our Youth Behind Bars report, which you see the front cover, in 2013. The process included doing a year-plus long of kind of scoping out data and public information, doing interviews, with all sorts of people across the state who work with young people who are in the adult system, with older youth who are in the juvenile system, with other advocates in Michigan and outside of Michigan, who have run similar research projects or campaigns. And so we really
from the Youth Behind Bars report. So what you're looking at now is kind of a map of the criminal justice process for youth. After they're arrested, they can go, if you're 16 years or younger, typically you go to the juvenile court. You can be diverted or processed through the traditional juvenile justice system, placed on probation, sent to a residential placement, or the traditional things that happen in the juvenile court. Or you can be tried as an adult and waived to the adult system. But for 17-year-olds and older, you're automatically considered an adult, and the process goes only exclusively through the adult system. If you're found guilty, you're placed on probation, sent to jail, or incarcerated in an adult facility. So specifically for the report's findings, we wanted to look at what were driving kids in Michigan into the adult system. And what we found is a lot of the policies that fueled this increase of adultification of youth really came to a period from the late 1980s to the early to mid 1990s. All across the country, states were enacting new laws to be tough on crime, looking in response to some high-profile violent crimes, particularly youth violent crimes. So states were looking at ways to, legislators were looking at ways to increase laws that could, or enact laws that would increase ways that you could be prosecuted as adults. And Michigan's laws is being the toughest in the nation. And so the following bullets really spell out some of those laws. Now, in Michigan, 17-year-olds have actually been prosecuted as adults for the last 100 years, so that one isn't particularly new. The next three really were increased during that time period. For example, a youth between the ages of 14 and 16 for certain offenses, particularly the most heinous crimes, homicide, armed robbery, your sexual crimes, things like that, they can be transferred to the adult system at the discretion of the prosecutor without any kind of judicial review at the juvenile court level. They call that automatic prosecutor waiver. During that period, additional crimes were tacked onto that list of offenses that you can be automatically waived for. An example of one is if you are a youth in the juvenile justice system, housed in a juvenile facility, and you run away, you can be automatically transferred to the adult system as a crime for that. That was one that was added on during that period. Also, youth of any age can be tried as an adult through this proceeding called designation. And then finally, that final bullet, once adult, always adult, means if a youth is waived to the adult system, any felony offense that they're charged with in the future is automatically heard within the adult system, whether you're found guilty, whether or not you're found guilty of that first initial crime that you were transferred for. So once you're considered an adult, you're always considered an adult. So looking at the statistics from that snapshot between 2003 and 2013, over 20,000 youth under the age of 18 were convicted as adults and placed under the jurisdiction of the Michigan Department of Correction, which means that they were either placed on adult probation, sent to jail, or incarcerated in an adult correctional facility for a crime they committed. Currently, approximately 6,000 of these youth are still under the supervision of MDOC. And 75 children under the age of 14 were convicted as adults. And it was really high profile. There's been high profile cases even lately. I think last year there was a young boy in Grand Rapids that was convicted as an adult for murder and he was only 12. High profile case in Pontiac during that period of the tough on crime was Nathaniel Abraham in Pontiac. He was 11, convicted of murder charges as an adult. So as I said, at any age you can be convicted as an adult. And we really want to focus on 17-year-olds, and that's why the Raise the Age campaign is so important, because of that huge number that we gave, the 20,000 between 2013 and 2003 and 2013. 95% of that 20,000 were there simply because they were 17. And if you think about it, that age 17 conflicts with so many different laws in Michigan, right? Though you're convicting them of any crime, and that's stealing a candy bar to more serious crimes, they still can't buy a lottery ticket. They still can't rent a car or sign a lease, things like that. And then also, child welfare laws still consider 17-year-olds children, right? So a 17-year-old's parents can be charged with abuse and neglect of a child, yet that 17-year-old, if he commits a crime, is considered an adult in the justice system. Majority of the 17-year-olds convicted as adults were convicted for crimes that were not violent or did not involve a weapon. The majority of them never participated in the juvenile justice system, so they never had a chance to even receive any kind of juvenile youth appropriate and developmentally appropriate services. And over half of them spent time in prison during their supervision. And so this next screen really shows where the majority of the youth that are waived system or convicted as adults come from. For 16-year-olds and younger, the majority of them come from the following counties, the following 10 counties, and there's kind of a range that you see. It's not specific to urban or a certain region in the state. It's all over because it's really based on the philosophy of the judges, the courts, prosecutors, and the communities, and what they decide to sentence a youth for or convict a youth for as an adult. For 17-year-olds, it's really based on population, right? Because if you're a 17-year-old, you're automatically considered an adult anyway. It just depends on the majority of the number of 17-year-olds you have in your community. And so the most populous counties will have the most 17-year-olds convicted as adults. The majority of the youth that are convicted as adults come from very traumatic childhoods. The majority of them had either a family member or a friend killed. The majority of them come from single family households or have parents that have had substance abuse issues and also have spent time in foster care. And look at that average out-of-home placement rate. 11 times is the average amount of times that a youth was placed out of the home during foster care for the youth convicted into the adult system. And many of the youth had family members that were also in prison. And you know, that slide's really important because it says that people that are hurt people, right? People who experience trauma often inflict hurt on other folks. Mm-hmm. And so looking at trauma is really important. And then for more demographic data, as you may expect, the youth that are transferred to the adult system or convicted as adults in Michigan are overwhelmingly kids of color, making up 53% of the kids under MDLC jurisdiction at the age of 17, even though they only make 23% of the population statewide. Over 50% of the kids under the age of 16 or under were Black, and even though they only make up 18%. And during the last decade, there's been a really large uptick of girls in the adult system. They make up 10% now of the youth transferred to the adult system. And those are important because most of the treatment in the adult system aren't really geared not only for kids, but they're not really gender responsive. So trauma, some of the experiences that girls experience during their childhood aren't being addressed when they're sent to the adult facilities. And whereas all of the boys are generally transferred to a facility called the Thumb Correctional Facility, which is up north in Lapeer. It's a mixed facility, so they're housed with other adults. But they're kept separated via the federal PREA laws that Kristen talked about. You have to be sight and sound separated from adults if you're in the same facility with them. For girls, there's only one female facility in Michigan. It's called Huron Valley, close to Ypsilanti in Washtenaw County. And there's only about, there can't be more than 4 or 5, right?
That's right.
Yeah, girls under the age of 18 in the facility, and they have to be kept in a separate wing all by themselves. There was a point where we were talking to a deputy warden at the women's prison, and she said that they only had 2. And so they had to have staff, they had to be totally isolated, and all they had were each other in this entire wing of the prison for themselves. The majority of the 17-year-olds that enter prison come with an education at the level of a sophomore in high school or less, come with a drug history or substance abuse problems and mental health treatment that frankly is not being treated for somebody in a way that really is effective for somebody at their age range. And then 40% were committed to juvenile facilities in the past as well. So adult facilities are not equipped for you. We got an opportunity to actually tour the Thumb Correctional Facility, and so I was able to see some of these experiences myself. When you go there, the adults, because they don't have to be as segregated as the youth for protection measures, you can see adults walking around the camp or the facility grounds, mowing lawns, blowing leaves, working in working workshops, culinary arts, all these things that the youth don't necessarily have the opportunity to participate in. There isn't an opportunity to get a high school diploma. They're only required to get 8 hours of school per week. The only option for completion of high school once you go to prison is taking the GED, and the GED prep classes and the exam is really based on priority of parole dates, right? Mm-hmm. So if you, and there's long wait lists, very long wait lists. When I went to the Thumb, they said that the wait list was 150 people long. So imagine if you're a youth who already has to be separated away and can't participate in a lot of the programming and a lot of the activities happening at the facility, and you're not going to be paroled anytime soon, there really isn't a lot of activities for you. So it's obvious why, in addition to immaturity and some of the issues like that in the prison, why they would be more disruptive and have a bit more misconducts. Mm-hmm. And so some of the consequences for that is that incarceration increases safety. They're much more likely to be victimized in prison, both physically and sexually by other inmates and guards. There was a huge lawsuit recently against the MDOC on behalf of about 500 youth that made the claim that they were not adequately protected from these abuses while they were incarcerated during a certain period.
Jackson just joined the line.
I don't know currently where that's. Okay, so that lawsuit's still active. And then it actually increases crime. It doesn't make things any better when you house youth in adult facilities or charge them and convict them as adults. There was a study done by the CDC that looked at youth who were convicted as adults compared to their counterparts that remained in the juvenile justice system for similar offenses. And they found that those who were convicted as adults were 34% more likely to commit a new crime once they were released sooner, and the crime that they committed was a much more violent offense. And then we often hear about the cost of prison, that it's often more expensive to send somebody to prison than it is to go to college. Mm-hmm. And just like adults, youth leaving prison, which the majority of them do leave, face the same kind of barriers that many people face once they get home to finding employment, improving their education outcomes, and so forth, with the additional barrier that they were kids when they first went to prison, right? So they never had that opportunity in the community to learn how to gain some of these adult life skills before they were, that period was interrupted in their development.
And so Jason just take you through a lot of really kind of statistics and findings that when we conducted this research, we had a hypothesis of what we expected to find. It was a little bit more extreme. So with these large array of findings and fairly negative ones. It's, we had to kind of come up from just being like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with this? And so we came up with a slew of policy recommendations because we have to have a solution to these really tough and hard problems. First and foremost, because of that 95% of that 20,000 number, we knew that 17-year-olds needed to stop being tried automatically and treated as adults. Michigan is one of only now 7 states where that's the case. We're clearly well behind, but it wasn't just raising the age. There's a lot of other issues in terms of how we treat those young people who are waived and treated as adults. We shouldn't have these types of facilities. We recommended removing all youth from adult facilities, restricting any type of use of youth segregation or isolation, and increasing types of ways of legal representation or public oversight of these young people as they progress through the system. And so we armed ourselves with a large amount of data. We took our time to do it because we knew that what we were going to do once we had a report written, we wanted to push it out. But we couldn't just take these statistics and facts and figures and tell people, look at these numbers, without giving them context. And so the next stage really began. We took our research and we turned our facts into a story. We had a full laid out strategy with an online and media strategist that we had here in our office that we worked with. We created infographics and stock image shareables. There's a few examples. I just kind of posted the images up here. We used storytelling and narrative, because when we talk about there's 20,000 people in the state of Michigan who've been tried on the age of 18, that means there's 20,000 people that we can work with and find. And those 20,000 people have families and they have dependents. And so we needed to take their stories to show the power to that number. We were able to really utilize, the media picked this up. We're very fortunate that we were on the front page of, for example, the Detroit News. We got it picked up by Al Jazeera America, that we'll talk a little bit about later, where a documentary was made, because this is really a true problem. And so we were able to give context to just how bad this is. It's not just a number, it's people's faces, it's people's families that were being pulled apart. And so that was a big part of the strategy. And it really is that way. So you have to kind of give context and give context to the numbers and through stories. And so it's I would say almost simultaneously, but we also knew that as the report was rolling out, we needed to have the communication, those tools in place. But we also needed to have allies and partnerships in place that we knew would be supportive of. Here we are. Okay, so I was just kind of talking about how we really need to take our communication tools and build a partnership. Now, a lot of these folks, we'd already kind of laid the groundwork, right? So our year worth of research, that meant that we were interviewing people on their thoughts on whether or not they thought raising age was a good idea, whether or not they had good strategies on how to combat this issue. We knew of certain organizations that had already kind of said, like, yeah, we already know this is the right, and these help us. So we had a pretty good understanding of who would be the foundation of our coalition. We knew we needed family members and youth who'd been directly impacted. We knew we needed people who actually serve these young people in the courts and in the facilities, and both on the adult and the juvenile side. And so it became and I think that's something to take away when we talk about our advocacy work. Each one of the stages builds upon each other. And so that's what really happened here.
So as we started to do our outreach and outward communications to the public and the stakeholders, we started doing community meetings where we did presentations, kind of like we're doing right now, on the findings of the Youth Behind Bars report, shared our recommendations, and then also received feedback from the communities and the stakeholders that we presented to about what they felt and what they thought about what they just heard and read from us. We did meetings all over the state. You see the 4 regions, big meetings we did for our Youth Behind Bars presentations, but we did presentations at any little community group that asked us to come, any youth serving coalition, and any kind of, we did presentations up in Grand Traverse, Leelanau County. Yeah. We did a nice little road tour presenting on Youth Behind Bars, because we wanted to make sure that across the state, people had true facts and information about this issue, because we knew that, you know, not everybody was going to be on board, and there were going to be counterpoints out there, and we wanted to make sure that people had strong facts supporting what we were trying to advocate for. We got a lot of great feedback at those meetings, and overwhelmingly, the majority of the audience really were shocked to find out about how many kids were convicted as adults in Michigan, and some of their experiences when they are. Most people didn't think that, and they really supported the idea of treating youth as youth, separate from adults when they come in contact with the law. Like Kristen mentioned, there was a documentary that highlighted the experiences of youth in the adult system, or the adult facilities in Michigan, particularly around the sexual abuse and physical assaults that youth experienced in the MDOC prisons. It was done by the Al Jazeera channel, which is now defunct. But they used a lot of facts and figures from the Youth Behind Bars report, and we were really in communications with the producers of the documentary. They gave us a DVD to keep of the documentary, so we were able to show it at a lot of regional meetings and events as well, to really give a visual to some of the issues that we were talking about, which was really impactful, and people were really fired up after seeing that video. I saw folks leave the room because they couldn't see some of the images that were shown, because it was actual prison footage of youth in Michigan being abused, and some of their testimony as well, and had a lot of great advocates, and our legislative champions, which we'll get into, were also featured in the documentary as well. In April of 2015, you see the flyer that's attached to the slide. We had a large forum here in the Capitol, Lansing, to launch our campaign, our official Raise the Age campaign. We brought as many stakeholders as we could to the meeting. We invited experts on the issue of youth in the adult system, not only from Michigan, but also across the nation, to come and do presentations and panels, including from other states that have already raised the age, so that they could explain to people exactly what that looked like and what the consequences were for them, since they've already gone through this process. And it was really a good forum. We got a lot of great feedback from it.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And so then we launched our official campaign. There you see our website, Raise the Age Michigan. It's actually raisetheagemi.org. It had that logo going out for a little while before we figured out that we put .com instead of .org. But if you look up .org, or even if you just Google Raise the Age Michigan, you'll see the website. It has a lot of great news articles. Anytime any of those news articles, like the one you saw from the Detroit News, and anything else, we just put it on there. We wanted to make sure that it was a website that was for the people of Michigan, separate from MCCD. So any information that we got from colleagues and partners were also listed there as well. We wanted to make sure that this was a Michigan campaign, and not just exclusively viewed as something that we were trying to push. And so we developed a statement of principles that our coalition members and concerned citizens and people who wanted to become involved in the campaign could sign on to, because it's important that you have some sort of activities that your coalition members can participate in, so that they remain energized and active, right? So we developed a statement of principles that outline the reasons why it's a bad idea to keep youth in the adult system, and why it's good that a good idea to raise the age and move as many kids out of the adult system in prisons as possible, that people could sign on to. And if you go onto the website, you can see the long list. I think that the last time I checked, there was over 500 individuals who signed on, and then close to 100 organizations, both statewide and national organizations, that signed on. Mm-hmm. And we really asked for, looked for a cross section of those organizations, and and people to sign on to show that it's not just only advocates that are signing on to show their support. You can see even by the logos that are included on the website, some of those organizations are actually providers who would then take these 17-year-olds if you raise the age. So they're signing on saying that they're willing to serve these kids if you do this. An example of that is MJDA, which is on the right-hand side of the logo box there. That's the Michigan Juvenile Detention Association. So having the juvenile detention, who may end up housing a lot of 17-year-olds, saying, yes, we will support this, and yes, we'll take this, that's a big step. You know, we don't want, of course, we support community-based programming as much as possible, but if there is some situation where a kid is in some sort of facility, it is always much better to have them in a youth serving facility than for adults. And so having those facilities themselves sign on and willingly advocate for raising the age was a big get, right? We also developed a advocacy toolkit that individuals could use to push for the legislative changes in their own communities. It was a huge output, a huge packet of information that our partners and us worked on together. It includes sample op-eds, letters to the editors that people could send, letters to their legislators that advocates for change, and additional information about and talking points about youth in the adult system. We have regular newsletters that go out about the Raise the Age campaigns. So any kind of news that's going on with the legislative process, action alerts where we ask for people to start to get involved and contact legislators, events that are coming up related to the campaign. We also really try to include information as well, so that folks could see how this is happening around the country.
Exactly, and just like kind of the hold into this, a big part of it, and Jason said this before, that we wanted to make, this was not a campaign from MCCD. While we might have and still do maintain the website and send out the newsletters, this is a campaign of all these people who signed up on the Statement of Principles, and so it's a coalition of all of these groups. And so it's really truly important to have this, whether it's any type of campaign or coalition, and to push forward in this one large mass, so that we really branded ourselves as Raise the Age Michigan, that is separate from each individual agency, and that really it's been working quite well. And so we took that, right? And so we were able to take our large mass and hundreds of individuals and agencies, and we caught the attention, as Jason mentioned. We went on our roadshow. Honestly, you asked us to present, we would present. And sometimes if you didn't want us to, we would still knock on your door and say, hey, can we talk to you? And the great thing about doing these types of presentations, because we armed ourselves with a long point of time of research, we conducted this research on our own in office, with help of other academics and people who vetted it for us and said that yes, this is correct. We felt very confident that we had the right information, and so that when we presented, it was able to catch the eyes of whoever. We didn't know necessarily who was in the audience. It didn't. And the story I'd like to tell, Jason and I, we presented in a basement on a cold night. I think Jason was really sick. Oh, wow. And it was a room full of about 10 people. And it happened to be that Representative Harvey St. Tana was on a panel or in the audience with us, and it caught his attention. And he said, I want to take this. We want to move forward with it. Let's go. And that's what really kind of started. And that's a great example of, don't be, intimidated. That's like, oh, there's not enough people. Oh, this aren't the right audience. You never know who's there. And so we were able to take our work, and we formed, and I'll talk a little, we identified certain governmental champions. Again, we'd already started this coalition. We tried our best to include certain stakeholders, and some judicial and some executive branch folks who had said that, yes, this is the right thing to do, but we can't really talk about it yet because, we're elected officials. But with joining a governmental champion through the legislature who can actually be a little bit louder and had an agenda to push, that truly helped. We identified certain stakeholders that we needed to bring to the table and say, like, okay, what can we do that we can all come together And we identified certain policy language, not just recommendations, but actual bill numbers, and where they need to be changed, what language needs to be created. And so the first step, when I talked about with these lawmakers on this picture here, this was just a very small subset. We formed a legislative working group. I think the full tally was about a 20-person working group. It was a handful of representatives from both sides of the aisle. Bipartisanship was a key portion of this because, again, it's a bill package and a campaign of all the people, not just one side. And we narrowed it down after a fairly long year of meetings to these 10 issues, which, if you'll notice, look very similar to the policy recommendations that we set forth in our research from before. So because, again, we were armed with our research and our facts and figures, and we had these in our brains already, we said, we want to do this. We were able to bring it to the table and directly tell people that, look, you told me before that this is an issue, and so let's really try and dig in. And again, that legislative priorities turned into bills. And so attached to each one of these 8 bills, they actually have House bill numbers. A package of 20 bills was introduced on October 7th of 2015, after starting this campaign a little over 2 years prior. And it was 20 bills. That meant there are 20 separate legislators, or about 20. Someone have 1 or 2 more bills just together, who work across the aisle and were able to kind of push this forward. And so these were based on the continued and deliberate, thought process of the entire prison working group, which included people from the Department of Corrections all the way to the ACLU, including us and our coalition partners and everything. And so those bills are currently active. They were introduced in 2015 in October. They had their first House committee hearing, and the following December, they eventually passed through committee and eventually passed through the House of Representatives with a very large vote, which we were thrilled about. So now currently, as of about a month ago, we had our first Senate Judiciary hearing. And those bills, again, they're very active. And so what we've been doing simultaneously, the campaign has not stopped simply because we've gotten to the point of legislation and policymaking. We simultaneously, as the bills were introduced in October 2015, we had, when you see a picture below, we coordinated with a partner of ours, a coalition partner called Michigan United, which is a grassroots campaign organizing group. It works all across the Michigan on various issues. They prioritized this particular issue at one of their large rally days of our bill sponsors to come and see the actual people in the community that they're working and fighting for. So we're able to use that type of grassroots rallying. We coordinated with those groups and others on various legislative days where, for example, another coalition partner, Citizens for Prison Reform, did a mock solitary confinement unit looks like, and it sat on the Capitol lawn, and we were able to talk to legislators and say, look, this is what our young people sit in our adult prisons, but also connect with connect across the coalitions and agencies together. And at the same time, we've been contacting our lawmakers. We've been able to push these bills through, but it's not without a lot of the individual connections that have been made. And every one of our hearings, we've done our best to, for example, in the December hearings in the House committee, it was actually a 2-day long, they had an overflow of rooms for all the people that came out. We had public testimony from people who were directly impacted, some of the same folks who were able to share their stories through publications, communication tools we made. Former youth who were there. We set up separate public media events where people were actually able to speak their full stories, and the media was able to take attention. It was right next to the same day of the hearing. And frankly, these directly tied into certain votes. And obviously we put vote on there because we just had a nice election, and it's very clear with these types of elections to see what happens when the collective can really truly make a big shift in power. And so quite frankly, and I wanted to show, I think we can do this, our website, So, and this is another thing, this is part of the Raise the Age website. Can you all see this? Yeah. Okay. This is our raisetheage.org website. And this is just one place where we have like a take action. And this is, because these bills are active, these are our House sponsors. And we've been listing their contact information. You can download all the information about the legislative package to arm yourself with kind of your elevator speech of what does this do, why is this important. This is a take the action kind of these when our bills were up for vote, and we would take action and send this out to our followers. And so there's a lot of ways to do this, and sometimes it's hard to hear kind of the same things over and over again. Contact your lawmaker, contact your decision maker, but it really truly does work. And so I'll bring it back to here. And that's pretty much where we're at the end of our presentation, kind of going through the full steps of where we are with the Raise the Age campaign, where the stages we've gone through. And it really, again, I'm pulling back this again. It's been mirroring these types of stages, and if you see it in a circle, because it's not just one separate part of this process, of this advocacy process that has really pushed us farther. It's each one of these phases building upon each other, and we're continually going back and forth to use our communication tools, our research facts, the direct action. We went through the research because that could be a lot to kind of digest. But so, thoughts, questions?
Okay, folks, so thank you first and foremost for that very informative presentation, not just in terms of the data and the presentation itself, but actually the process of moving an issue to a space of advocacy and action, the coalition building aspects of it, like the way that you have done this work is phenomenal, and I just want to thank you because I have like a whole page of notes and ideas just generated from not the content of it, but as well as the process of it, because that's one of the conversations we've been having as the network is like, really, how do we approach policy? Like, does the infrastructure and the process need to look like? And one of the things that we knew was that bringing folks that do this work every day into the network was probably the best way to approach it, so that we're not reinventing the wheel and that people can do the thing that they're good at. So I'm so glad that you're good at this, and that you're advocating on behalf of our children. And this just, like, it lines up with milestone 6 so powerfully, that like so I guess one of the questions that I have is, so when you think about the others in the MBK Michigan network, in the communities that align, when you like lay out those counties, I see my brother's keeper. Not just those presently, but those that we actually could better engage. So what are your thoughts in terms of how we better connect with the work that's already moving? And one of the questions that came from Flint was, okay, so how do we get more involved, and what is it that we can do practically to engage people in our neighborhoods, the folks on the ground, so that they understand it, because they may not speak the language of policy or data. But so the storytelling piece has kind of answered that question, but there are people that really want to get more hands-on with this. So how would you envision that happening?
I would say, so like going back to the coalition building and reaching out to people that sign on to the statement of principles, I really, it's important that everyone signs on and everyone shows their support. But for me, I really thought it was powerful to have the providers do it. And so in communities where there are providers who would be working with those youth, or the youth serving institutions may have not, but are willing to, engaging them. We had school districts who were willing to sign on to the Raise the Age campaign. That's great. That's really important and impactful. They see kids every day. They have 17-year-olds in their schools. Having folks locally engage their institutions in saying that this is something that we want you to support, it could be a really powerful thing. And they could work with those institutions to get the data to present to legislators or the stakeholders that can make this change happen, to show that they have the room, the space. An example that I can think of is juvenile facilities. Many jails, adult facilities in some of those 17-year-old counties you see on that slide are overbooked, overcrowded, suffering from a lot of the issues that happen when you have overcrowded jails and facilities. Whereas their juvenile facilities, because juvenile crime is actually on the decline, are half empty. Macomb County, for example, had to lay off half their staff because they had so much space in the facilities. Again, not pushing that juveniles should be placed in facilities in general, but that's an important fact that legislators may not know, that you have this overcrowded facility in the same county where you have a very open facility on the juvenile side. It's important that data gets to them. And so we may not know that as much as somebody in the community might.
Yeah, and I would also say too, it's not, so, I mean, I think we entitled this perhaps too smallly about legislative advocacy. It's not just the legislators that can actually make changes and do policy or just big decisions, right? There's a lot of folks, whether it's your county official, it's your local township official. Those are the people, Jason mentioned, school districts. These are people who actually can make very large decisions, and having them change their mind, or even approaching them and saying, well, what is your thought on this? Is something that it's never wrong. It's always helpful to, even if it's a person you think that's like, oh, they're not big influencers, they probably are. And if they're not, then they're bosses, or if they're not, then maybe someone they know that is. And it's this understanding that we should all come to this understanding that young people should be treated as young people and as children and not as adults. And the Raise the Age campaign was a first step. There's a lot more to this than just raising the age from 17 to 18. We have to understand fully what are the horrors of putting someone in prison. What does that look like? What are the horrors of prosecuting a young person as an adult and shackling them in the courtroom and keeping them isolated in a jail cell? What does that look like? And who are these young people, and what family lives are they coming from? They're vulnerable. They've had traumatic experiences. These are all stories that somebody can relate to. Someone can relate to, like, I had a father that was murdered, or saying that story, or like I knew a young person that was in foster care, and it's more likely than not that young person in foster care will end up somewhere deeper into the justice system. And sharing in that power of storytelling cannot be understated enough. That it's those individual pieces that I hear day to day when we go meet with people, lawmakers in Lansing. They stick to their own stories. They have their own pieces of their own life that they can relate to. And that's all they really kind of think about. They can see facts and figures and charts all day long. And it's not that's not what is influencing as some person coming into their door and sitting down and saying, when I was a young person, I was arrested and tried as an adult. And I sat in prison, and I was beaten, and I came out and I couldn't find a job. And, this is my story, and this is my power, and this is what I have to tell you. And that works so much better than any fact that we can give you. And so a big part of this campaign that we've really found is and unfortunately, we're an advocacy organization, but we focus more on policy. We focus more on research, and we're providing technical assistance to those sites that we don't provide direct service. And so that's why it was so important for us. If we did this as a campaign, we had to partner with people who do grassroots work. We had to partner with those facilities and those agencies that Jason kept talking about, who actually see children day in, day out, whether it was a school district or if it was a facility, whether it's a community-based provider, whether it's like a healthcare provider. We needed to connect with them so that they were also armed with this litany of research that we have. And sometimes we know too much about it, right? And it's hard for us to be the spokespersons because we're not necessarily the people that have been directly affected. We're the researchers, or we're the people that have the facts to give you. But it comes better from that story maker, from that person who is the correct spokesperson. And I think the best way to get involved is if you know someone who's been involved, let us know. Or tell us and download this presentation and arm yourself with it. If you're confused by what some of the things mean, we'll be happy to come and kind of sit by your side, and as that person does the explanation, we'll just fill in the gaps. We've been doing that for years, and we'd like, because this is while we've done this since 2013 was when the research started. You know, we were really thrilled and pleased to see how fast these bills went along, but it was kind of unexpected. It was unexpected to the point that, like, oh wow, this is a sea change that's happening. And it's, you know, it's a problem that's been bubbling up, and people want to see this occur. We want to see this reform, this policy move. And so I think so if you have a story to tell, if someone wants to get engaged, they just have to honestly start talking about it. Mm-hmm. And then if they want to download this information and they don't know quite how to present it, we'll work with you on it. Mm-hmm. You know, literally signing up on our newsletters. We try our best to keep, it's been a little bit slower recently, but we try our best to kind of keep a roll of, you know, what's happening, whether it's on our bills or what's happening in Michigan or other news stories that are occurring that relate, whether it's other states that have recently made changes. There's a lot of folks who are probably a little bit better at the communications than we are, but we partner to push forward these types of campaigns. Mm. So I think that's the number one way. I mean, and when we say to contact your lawmaker, it's because we want them to hear that person's story and how it affects that individual, not because we want them to sit in front of them and say, here's a chart and this is why you should change your mind.
Mm-hmm. Oh, if I could add one more thing to the contact the legislator, like another point in which you can interact with elected officials is actually, I mean, it's passed now, but during the election process, right? If you attend a candidate forum for elected officials, both in the legislature, but also your local judges, prosecutors, sheriffs, you could go and actually ask them these justice-related issues. Mm-hmm. What's your stance, or what the adult system? Here's my feelings on it. What's your thoughts? What's your views? So that they have to put it out there, and that it's on their radar that people are really concerned about this. Mm-hmm.
And I will also say we've done smaller. So we mentioned that video a couple times. We've done like smaller kind of, like there was one church in the Flint area that did a small screening that people advocated to say, we wanted to do this here because we think our congregation needs to know about it. And churches are a great place because that's a community. They're community centers. They're kind of the flagships of people who are dedicated to something, and they have a common bond, and they can go back to their own communities or their own families and say, wow, I watched this and it was really impacted me. And like, don't you have a 17-year-old child? Or, you know, didn't you know X, Y, and Z how this affected that person? And it's really, the word of mouth, that's how a lot of these larger campaigns on a national scale, when we talk about, for example, gay marriage and that issue and how it all the way got up to the Supreme Court, it started with campaigns like this in the States. It started with people just kind of getting on this, changing their minds and the philosophy and this buy-in of like, well, of course gay marriage is what we should think about. Or you know, because I know I have a friend who is gay, or I have somebody, you know, who is married, but, you know, why is it different for that person from this person? And I think those types of, you have to think, if you think in a campaign, really, it's all of these extra separate pieces matter. But if we're trying to change hearts and minds at the same time, it starts with the vernacular, it starts with the storytelling, it starts with like, oh, well, because, you know, Mary said it was okay, so therefore John says it's okay too. You know? Does that help? It was a long explanation for that one question. Sorry about that.
And so I'm just like, I asked a really good question because that was like such a big answer, and it again just kind of reinforced a few things. So you're talking to our MBK scholars that are social work students, but we also have the Residential College for Arts and Humanities at Michigan State Universities that is extremely interested in creating their own MBK Scholars pathway. And so we're like in that space where we're like, okay, what does the proposal look like, and what's the most effective way for the folks that actually have the writing and the arts and theater and dance and all of these different creative expressions at their disposal to be able to have an impact on the My Brother's Keeper milestones and the outcomes for children of color. And I think you articulated so well what that proposal can look like. And so we've got some young folks here in actually across the state and across the nation that are involved in Black Lives Matter, and the arts and culture is absolutely one of the like most dominant spaces and themes that work is happening. And I think it's because it's driven by young people as opposed to old folks like me. that they bring like their stories and their full selves into it. So it's the visual medium, arts, culture, theater. And so I absolutely love that idea as we talk about engaging youth and communities more and bringing their voices into this work, that's a wonderful way for higher ed and our institutional partners and advocacy partners to really engage youth in telling their own stories and what this looks like for them. So yeah, thank you for that. And I just want to give space for others in the room to be able to ask questions and share their thoughts. I'm going to stop talking and mute myself.
Commissioner Mary Alice.
I'll always point out, I mean, and Angela, I know you know. Sure. Hello. Hi.
Hi, Commissioner.
Oh, okay. Commissioner Mary Alice Adams, City of Benton Harbor. As an ALPAC member, we had a meeting last night, but their focus was mainly on a lot of issues that officers go through and why they probably act out the way they do when they meet us on the street. With stresses and everything like everybody else in life. And one gentleman told them that because they're held to a higher standard. We actually had prosecutors in the house last night, as well as we may have had one or two judges. I wished I had had this information so I could have spoke with them afterwards, but we have a meeting on a monthly basis. And I want to thank you all for this information because it gives me an opportunity to ask some more specific questions. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
are there any others that I should be addressing though when I get them in our presence because it's hard to get them to the table?
Well, I think law enforcement, prosecutors, judges, I mean, those are high priority targets if you think of them in terms of targets, or people who need a little bit more convincing. Because a lot of, we're speaking specifically about young people who are charged as adults or 17-year-olds. What comes to mind is that very law and order, tough on crime kind of image that, well, they did the crime, they should do the time. Well, that's very antiquated. It's old school thinking that is simply against the grain in terms of whether you're thinking about research, it's against the grain of how people interact now. It's against the grain in terms of what we're seeing across the country and other states and other communities, that how they're treating, that if you actually truly want to solve a problem of public safety, you actually have to treat the community and each individual as though they live there and not as though they're criminals. And so that young people can be rehabilitated and things can change. So I think that those are great places to start. I would also, I think, arming yourself with, if you have educators or law, like ISDs or other people who kind of can make those decisions for other lawmakers. And I would also suggest county commissioners because, quite frankly, this always goes back to money. Whether it's tough on crime and people not having a fear of people who commit crimes, or it's about, well, it costs just too much money. We like this idea, but we really just can't afford it. Well, frankly, you can afford it because we can't afford the status quo is the answer to that. We cannot continue to afford to have young people being treated and tried as adults. And I think and one of the biggest groups that is really stopping any further movement or moving these bills any faster is because there's more concern about dollars than there are about the young people that are caught in the system. And while we may be a little bit a little too close to home on this campaign, and I think that budgets are important because we want to make sure that law enforcement officers are trained appropriately. We want to make sure that courts and staff can actually have good capacity and their staff are well compensated and there's good resources. But we also know that we can't necessarily, we can't forget about the human impact and about, the dollars that are attached to the long life of consequences with an adult conviction and the trauma that comes with being in a jail cell or a prison cell. And so all of those things, and frankly, there are plenty of cost-benefit analysis that show that long-term treatment of young people as children will produce a more efficient, more cost-effective outcomes than they will if you do vice versa and continue the track of treating the young people as adults. And so we're happy to do this perhaps offline in terms of more cost, the dollars and cents analysis for those who are a little bit more in the thick of things. But you know, I think that those are great targets.
Mhm.
And again, like what you just mentioned, those types of meetings are exactly the places, because those are really more so than folks that sit in Lansing, because those are the people that inform and elect the representatives and the senators that sit in Lansing.
Yeah, county commissioners are huge.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. And I pulled up our contact information, so you can always reach out to us at any point.
I have a question that might not be directly like 100% related, but I'm curious to kind of see your guys' take on it. So I've been at the Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation, and I've been working a lot. The lady I've been working at is their like reentry lady, and yesterday she was kind of telling me about community courts and how those work, and those are kind of like a push away from the like, you did the crime, now pay the time. And I'm wondering if you guys like have an opinion on community courts. Like obviously so I'm curious if you're like, if there are more pushes for more community courts and stuff like that.
Do you want to talk about civil citations?
Yeah, no, I think that in increasing and expanding any kind of options that shift youth, especially youth, but adults as well, who commit certain offenses away from the traditional court processing is important. Like we fully support and like push for the expansion of diversion programs around the state, and even for folks that are adjudicated or convicted in the traditional court system, there are great programs post-adjudication, like mental health courts and drug courts that will address the specific issues that led to their behavior rather than just the same generic punishments that are given out often. Address those issues specifically, but then also will rid that criminal record permanently if things are satisfied. Anything that will reduce contact, but then also lift the lifelong burdens of a criminal record, we support. But in regards to community courts specifically, yes, I think that is an excellent idea, along with restorative justice, implementing more restorative justice programming that really takes the emphasis away from this adversarial model of the court, where the state is the victim almost, which is a generic victim, right? And really places the repairing of the harms with the actual victim of the crime and the person who committed.
Right, absolutely. And I think that goes back to, if I can add just a little bit, why this slide here about the traumatic and vulnerable life histories of young people really comes into play, because we want to make sure that this hits home, that when we're talking about these young people in the context of our research, you know, it shouldn't be a large surprise that people who experience about almost 80% of young people before they were convicted of a crime had someone in their lives that was murdered, you know, has experienced this traumatic event, or had spent, you know, on 81% had a parent that had substance abuse issues. So it's all these other like issues that are compounding on them that could be changed or addressed while they're still in the community, that could perhaps be taken, you know, head on through, like Jason said, restorative justice techniques, having the community court. I think those elements are fantastic, but what it really takes is that buy-in for people to kind of really transform or turn what we think of justice on its head. And that's what a community court does in many ways, that it actually takes a full community and kind of a lower level, provides citations rather than criminal records. It provides, you know, a kind of a wraparound understanding of what justice means in a more community, like, setting, rather than a punitive model of the state, you know, state versus, John Doe kind of thing. And it's a holistic approach to solving the issue of public safety rather than just, you know, being reactive and fear-based. So it's tough. I mean, it's not an easy thing, but those types of models, the more that you see of them, just like we were talking about, like with campaign, what's the best way to do it? The more you see, the more people are willing to take that, be courageous, whether they're program managers, you know, or they're able to have funders who are able to be more forward thinking and say, we want to be progressive and put this in the community. And especially in a place like Detroit, with and that has a high crime rate that we think it's too tough to tackle. Well, those are the places where it can really thrive, because there's a lot of really great, strong neighborhood binds, and that's how community is served. Amongst neighbors to neighbors and in communities that are of like mind, rather than having someone come in from across the state or from the state attorney general's office and saying this is what the punishment will be. It's those types of programs and that'll really make a difference. And we'll continue to, we're talking about costs, we'll continue to cut down on costs of justice issues, continue to really change the way that we deliver and perceive of what both youth and adult justice is. Just a good question.
Yeah. If there's a community that's support to implement programs like that, no reason to wait for state-based policy to change on it. Go for it. And be the pilot, be the example that you can show the rest of the state that these actually work.
Yeah, because honestly, when I said this raise the age, it's really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what can be done for youth who are tried as adults. And it's the most approachable. We're literally like the last 7 states that haven't changed this. And so there's been other states that have been more courageous and have kind of led the pack to say like, look, nope, this can happen and sky doesn't fall and things actually got better and everyone's happy. And we're still having to convince people. So when you can see those a little bit more progressive and kind of people programs like that pop up, like community courts or civil citation programs or restorative justice techniques, you want to like incubate them and grow them as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Yeah, great question, Bridget. And I know I said I would be quiet, but I do want to kind of go, because you raised this up, is around this, the connection between what we're investing in education and what we're investing in incarceration. And if we look at what we spend per pupil in Michigan compared to what we spend to incarcerate a youth for a year. But the number that just jumped out at me, that 82% of the youth in your slide had no high school diploma, and that 30% had not completed or had only completed 8th or 9th grade. And so looking at kind of where our values are and what we prioritize. And so because we're having this conversation with students, and we're aligning our work with MBK Michigan with Michigan Department of Education's top 10 and 10 strategies, and understanding that we're not going to get to that top 10 and 10 if we're failing our children so early, that we really, we have perfected the school to prison pipeline. So I just want to stop and in these last kind of few minutes, ask for your thoughts on how we can more effectively collaborate across our systems so that education and justice are looking at the same information and being smarter about how we do our work, and what that looks like both at the state and local level.
Absolutely. So what I think that's a great question, and that comes up quite a bit in terms of the intersection of whether it's education, or when I brought up the slide again, the substance abuse mental health, because it's not just, you're absolutely right. We have what you said, perfected the school to prison pipeline. There's a lot of what we're seeing now from whether it's the Department of Education, from the Department of Health and Human Services, and the courts systems across the state, joining what they've called the School to Justice Partnership. I think, it's been like a top-down type of, we have these agendas, we want to kind of spread it down to the states. I don't know. In some ways, I think it's worked, but in other ways, I think it's isolated itself amongst those who are really kind of seen as being like the lawmakers, whether they're the judges or like the elected officials, those types of people. And it's not truly trickling into true community solutions. Which actually goes, I think that question falls really great with that, the community court, right? That's a community solution that actually affects day to day. It works with local providers. It works with, people in specific neighborhoods. And it's something that you can actually combat, that you can actually, again, it's using data. You can track a young person's or a person's progress through the system, whether you can see where their educational attainment is, if it changes. I think that involving the Department of Education and local school districts is key. A partner that has been a little bit absent from a lot of these conversations are school districts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we as a state are very decentralized. Local control matters more than anything else. And that we're not even talking about, we have 83 counties, but within all of those 83 counties, there are umpteenth school districts. They have their own individual budgets, and they have their own individual staff and needs of each one of the districts. And we have charter schools and private schools and competing for dollars. And so there's those types of things get lost. And I think that it's never too late to approach individual districts to say, like, can you be a little bit more progressive on your policies? What can we do to think about this type of work, or to dig in closer? Data is not necessarily aggregate.
Mm-hmm.
On aggregate meaning that you can't, there's no one repository at the Department of Education for all this information. For school systems, you have to actually go to each school system and find it. And it takes a lot of effort. And that's a great way to stop advocates and scholars, from going in and digging any further to actually find the exact problem. But it shouldn't stop, that it shouldn't stop people like us from digging further and arming each other with the data and the information, because it's really hard to argue against their own information. So I think it's absolutely involved. It's intimately connected in terms of, if you don't prevent the work up front, if you don't treat a young person appropriately in the beginning and identify certain trauma or mental health or education needs in the beginning, that's why it's called a pipeline. I mean, you will absolutely see that person in 10 years in a prison setting. And I think we have an opportunity right now, as the federal laws changed around ESSA with the Every Student Succeeds Act, and the Department of Education becoming a little bit more open, and wanting to see that 10 years and 10 success years. I'm really thrilled that My Brother's Keepers is involved and they've invited that, because they've been very isolating with partners like ourselves, and they have not really welcomed a lot of information. But it's really the very local subsets of school districts and those types of decision makers that need to be influenced. And I think the Department of Education will happily follow. I don't think that they have a problem. It's never really the large agencies that are really the issue. It's the individuals and the counties and the townships in this individual districts.
Yeah, no. I think that's a great place for the scholars to really engage their local communities, is getting that information from the school districts. Like Kristen said, you can't find out how many kids have been arrested at a school, because school districts aren't required to report that. You don't know if they are, what kind of offenses. Same thing for suspensions and expulsions. Yeah. You may have a broad idea of those numbers in aggregate, but what the reasons were, so to show that kids were suspended, expelled, arrested unfairly or disproportionately based on demographic information is difficult to know as well. So being able to engage those actual school districts, even ones who are supportive and saying, yes, we support it, then the way that they can further support it is providing that information.
Yep. Or talking to their colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Yep. To get them to support and provide.
Yep. So yeah, I think that's great.
Thank you both so much. I can't believe that 90 minutes has gone by so fast. So we had just enough time to get some, I think, really rich responses in addition to the information you provided. And so I want to ask your permission to be able to send the actual recording out to the entire network, and to actually be able to share it on the MBK Michigan website.
Be thrilled.
Sure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So I'm sorry for the disconnect.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. I think hopefully we solved the problem.
Yeah.
No, that was great. There were brief little interruptions there, but the information, we were just like cliffhanging, like, come back, we have to like keep this moving. So this is phenomenal. And we'll continue this. Yeah. So as we like think about our summit for next year, what does that look like to have this conversation on a broader scale across the state? Maybe going more in depth with some breakout sessions. So just want to like plant those little seeds about how we kind of utilize My Brother's Keeper network as another way of convening, as well as the local action summits that are happening within the local communities themselves, and how you all can show up and do the great work that you do both locally and statewide. Thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That'd be wonderful.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy
Thank
Thanksgiving,
you all.
everybody.
Yep.
Thank
You too.
Same to you all as well.
All right, scholars, 90 minutes. Thank you all. Have a great weekend, everybody.
You too.
You too.